My full name is David Lloyd George Ewing, and I was born in Douglas, Georgia. My mother uh, named me for several different people. David for my uncle who was a lawyer, David Sapp, and the Lloyd was for my father, and his name that he liked best was Lloyd. His name was Julian Lloyd Ewing, but he would call himself J. Lloyd Ewing. So Lloyd was from him. And then George was my father's father, George Ewing. And then my mother was a fan of the Prime Minister of England, who was David Lloyd George. And when I was born, she wrote him a letter uh, that I had been named for him, and he sent her a silver cup, which I wish I knew where it was, with my name on it, David Lloyd George, from the British Prime Minister.
That's cool. So what is the date? What date were you born?
November the 3rd, 1936.
So tell me about what you remember of your grandparents, their names, and any stories you want to share about them.
Well, my great uncle, uh, David Sapp, was that was my first name, David, and I was primarily named for him, who my father very much respected. And David Sapp not only was an outstanding lawyer, but he was also a very good watercolor artist, and we have some of his paintings that we really like. Very natural and rustic settings for the most part. Many are done with water in the scene and that sort of thing. Um, my uncle David had as an apprentice my uncle Marshall Ewing, my father's brother. My father was the oldest, and Marshall was second oldest in his family. They had 5 boys, and Marshall became a lawyer just by studying in the law firm of Uncle Dave. And then when I was graduated from college, my Uncle Marshall took me aside and wanted me to be his apprentice and become a lawyer. And he was one of the, had a reputation of being a very high-ranking or very well-respected lawyer, just like my Uncle David. So that was a temptation, but I wanted to teach, so I came away from that. My father's father, George Ewing, was, I got to know him a little bit. I worked for him very briefly, maybe for a day or two, in his company that would buy pecans from pecan growers all around Coffee County, the Douglas area of Georgia. So he was a pecan buyer and seller, would buy from the farmers and sell them to businesses. And he was pretty much of a disciplinarian. And in fact, I didn't like the way that he treated his employees, so I didn't stick around. And my father left home when he was, I think, 15, because he would get severe beatings from my grandfather, George Ewing. But despite that, I remember every time my grandfather, George Ewing, had a birthday, he loved Tampa Nugget cigars, and my father would make a point of buying him a box of Tampa Nugget cigars and taking those to him. Now, my grandmother was very prominent in my life. She married my grandfather when she was in what she called the state work. She worked for the Southern Baptist Convention, covering the state of Georgia, and she would go around the state and she would teach what they call mission study lessons. There would be books that would tell about a mission in first one country and another. And she had an excellent memory. So she would read, and then she would go and give mission study lessons in churches around Georgia. And I don't know but what she organized most of what was called women's missionary unions in Baptist churches around Georgia. So that was her state work, working with the WMU and giving mission studies. And she continued doing that up until she was probably in her 80s, that she would learn about mission studies from books and then give them to various churches around the area of Douglas, Georgia. But she had done that all over the state. And one of my grandfather's daughters had come to know my grandmother, and their mother had died. So she said, you would make a good wife for my father. So she introduced my grandmother to my grandfather, who was B.H. Tanner. Babe Tanner, that was his nickname. And Babe Tanner started with a very poor background in terms of monetary wealth, but great wealth in terms of being brought up with good discipline and good morals. And he had become an outstanding farmer and businessman. He owned more acres of land than any other farmer between Jacksonville, Florida, and Atlanta, Georgia. So he was very wealthy. And when he died, my mother inherited the home place. Fales was the name of it, which was south of Douglas, Georgia. And she also inherited the townhouse, a big brick, the first brick home that was built in Coffee County was built by my grandfather, and that was his main residence in town. And then there was a good bit of rental property that she also inherited. So my grandmother, after her third husband, her first husband was an MD, second husband was a wealthy man, farmer, and her third husband was one of the two founders of Bruton Parker College, which is in a town that's just west of Vidalia, Georgia. And I got to know J.C. Bruton very briefly. J.C. Bruton was a theologian. He had a Ph.D., which is the Ph.D. for theology. And but when he died, before I was, say, 5 years old, maybe it was 6 years old. But anyway, my grandmother came to live with my mother and my two sisters in the townhouse of my grandfather that she inherited in Douglas, Georgia. So Granny Bruton, or Miss J.C. Bruton, or she was Mary Tanner at one time. She lived with us most of the time while I was growing up. And my mother taught music and was gone teaching. She taught choir in the schools. She taught our church choir. And grandmother was the one that was at home practically all the time. So a lot of my bringing up was done by my grandmother as well as my mother. and my parents were divorced when I was in the first grade. So my father was very much a presence in my life, but since he wasn't at the home where I was raised, then I saw less of him. So that's a little bit of my grandparents and my Uncle Dave, and they were the part of my heritage that relate to those that came before me. We always had dogs, and that was a very pleasant memory of always being around dogs that were part of the family. Very well thought of, were very well behaved for the most part. I remember there was a time when my mother had lost most of her property. There were some bad decisions that had been made. Most of the time she would attribute those to my father. At one time he owned the sawmill in Douglas, Georgia, and that didn't go well. Another time he owned the Studebaker dealership in Douglas, and that didn't work out too well. So he was adventuresome and tried different things, and felt like a lot of what she inherited was not well managed. So after she lost most of her property, my father got a job driving a Greyhound bus, and their central location for the buses was in Lake City, Florida. So we moved to Lake City, Florida for the better part of a year. And I remember in Lake City, it was at the time of World War II just starting up, and sailor suits were popular with little boys. And my mother made most of the clothes of my sisters and myself, and she made me a sailor suit, but she couldn't get the bias tape that you need to go around the collar as an embellishment on the sailor suit. So she decided, that she would substitute rickrack. And she wrapped that sailor suit up in tissue paper and in a box and made it look like it came from a store. And I opened that up on my birthday, I think it was, and there was that rickrack. And I said, "This is for girls. This is not for me." And I would not tolerate a sailor suit with rickrack on it after my mother had gone to all that trouble to make that sailor suit for me. We lived next to, in Lake City, we lived, I think, at the edge of town, and there was some woods, maybe a vacant lot or two, but anyway, woods next to our house. And my mother, I loved to go outside and play in the woods, and I just loved to be outside growing up. And my mother told me that I had to be careful because there might be some snakes out there. And she told me snakes could charm a bird and make it sit still while they attack the bird by something that it sounded like a cobra, and being charmed by a person playing a flute and sitting in the lotus position in India. But anyway, so one day I was out playing in the woods, and my mother looked out the window and she saw me running down the street, and she yelled to me to stop, and she had to run me down I was just 6 years old, so I couldn't outrun my mother. But she ran me down and she said, David, why didn't you stop? And I said, Mama, I don't have snake brakes. So, so mother always told that story on me, that I had come up with that. And so anyway, from an early age, I could see humor in things, and tried to be optimistic, and tried to keep things light by having a little humor about stuff. Some people have not appreciated that, but I often used it in my teaching, and it served me well over the years. So I, I, I've had a few objections, but most of the time I've gotten a positive response from having a humorous streak in my disposition. Okay, let's see.
So you were in Lake City for a while.
Yeah, and then we moved back to Douglas, Georgia. That it did not work out with the driving of the Greyhound bus, and my mother being away from Douglas, Georgia, where she had lived all her life. And my mother had tried to make a go of it after some financial difficulties, but in the long run, things didn't work out between my parents, and they did get a divorce, which was very rare back in the early 1940s. So that was a stigma that my sisters and I lived with as we were growing up, that our parents were divorced. The most disappointing it was sometimes our church would have a father-son banquet, and my father couldn't be there, so it gave me a little bit of disappointment with that. Let's see. I was trying to think of some experiences with our dogs. I remember we had two female dogs, bitches, and they both had puppies about the same time. And our preacher at First Baptist Church of Douglas would have a story that he would tell to the children prior to each sermon. And my mother, as choir director, she was sitting there in the choir as he would tell stories, and one story was about dogs. So he asked if anybody had dogs, and some of us raised our hand, and I raised mine, and he said, well, how many dogs do you have? And I said, we've got 5. And then I paused a minute, and I said, no, we've got 9, because I remembered that our second female dog had also had a litter of puppies. So we had a house full of puppies. One of the saddest things, we lived on the thoroughfare through Douglas, Georgia, and I came home, and my sister was crying, and it's because one of our beloved dogs, female mother dogs, had been run over by a car. So we learned sadness with, as you do with animals, because their lifespans are much shorter than our own typically. And one of the offsprings of the female dog, Blossom, as I recall, I believe was a Spitz, and one of the runt of the litter was one that my sister named, I think it was Demasiado or something of that sort, and called him Demi. And Demi became my dog. And later on, when I was in the 6th grade, I had a paper route. And 7 days a week, I would get up and ride my bicycle and deliver papers, something on the order of 100 papers around Douglas, Georgia, either before school or before church or whatever. And I taught Demi to ride my bicycle. He would put his front paws up on the handlebars, and he would clutch to the bar that goes from the seat to the handlebars with his hind legs, and away we would go on my paper route. So he was my companion. And there was one time that I had gone to the newspaper stand and on a Saturday, and I had a big basket. Once my papers were out of the basket, I could put Demi up in the basket and take him around. So anyway, I had parked my bicycle in the alley next to the newsstand, and I had gone in and done some things in the newsstand, just usually camaraderie, or maybe putting the circulars in papers or whatever. There's always something to do. And my home was only a block and a half away from the newsstand. So I forgot about, I had told Demi to stay, and he was in my basket of my bicycle there in the alley, waiting for me to come back. And I left him. And I got home, and everybody loved Demi. And the assistant manager of the newsstand, who was also did the work of he was a black guy, and he was well respected, and we all cared for James Reed a lot. And James Reed called me at home, and he says, "What are you doing at home, David?" I said, "Well, I got through with what I was doing in the newsstand, came home." He said, "You realize that Demi is up here waiting for you in your basket? See how fast you can get back up here." So he was he was being a disciplinarian toward me because I had not treated my dog properly, who was a friend to everybody in the that worked at the newsstand. Another thing that happened with Demi going with me on my paper route was there was a report that there had been a dog that had killed some chickens on Ethel Street, and it was a white Spitz dog, and it must be my dog. And the report came back, "Oh no, that would not be me. Demi stays with me the whole time," I thought. But the next time I took Demi and we got to Ethel Street, at that particular point, Demi asked to get down. He'd let it be known if he needed to rest some from clutching on to the handlebar and that crossbar of the bicycle. So I let him down. And I went on up the street and took a right and came back down, took another right and came back down on the next street. And there was a happy, happy dog just waiting for me with his tongue out and a little tired and hassling and bright eyes, and put it back up there. And I said, "Okay, he is the culprit. He has been killing those chickens." So the next day I left him at home. I put him in a bedroom at our house. And my mother said that after Demi got left, that Demi would take he would get back from the door, and he would run against the door and impale himself against the door trying to get out to come go with me on my paper route. So Demi was one super dog. People even said that when he would go, if I had left him and gone to the newsstand without him, that he would go to the traffic light and wait with everybody else before he would cross the street. So I don't know if he could
Smart
tell red from green, but he knew to wait with the people before he crossed the street. So anyway, he was my buddy. I even have a picture of him on my bicycle in his favorite position as he would ride along with me.
I love your dog stories. What other stories can you think of memories from your childhood?
Well, the the paper route was a big thing. I know that in the fourth grade, our teacher, Miss Spivey, would arrange students according to how well they were doing in her classes. And I started off the year sitting about the middle of the class. And when she said that the students that made the best grades would be, as the teacher would look at the classroom, would be on the right hand side and right up at the front of the room. So I said, well, that's a challenge. And I hadn't thought much about grades, but that might be fun. So I started applying myself, and it wasn't too many months before I was up toward that top of the class at the right hand side. So I learned to make good grades there. And in the next grade, the fifth grade, I had practically all A's, and was real pleased with that. And my daddy had told me that if I continued to make A's, he'd give me $1 for every A. However, in the sixth grade, I got a paper route. And having a paper route for a couple of years, sixth grade, seventh grade, maybe into the eighth, but maybe 2 years was about it for the paper route. Getting up early in the morning and having to work pretty hard, and just barely making it to school, and then going to the newsstand after school. I got complacent about my grades, but the paper route taught me to be dependable and have perseverance and that sort of thing. And my mother, on Sunday, we had huge, thick papers on Sunday, sort of like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution today, real thick on Sunday, New York Times, big, huge papers. So most of the time, my mother would take me on my paper route, and I would sit my papers up on the hood of our Studebaker automobile, and would throw them from the hood of the car as she drove me through my paper route. So that was good that on Sunday, when it was my hardest day, that Mother pitched in and helped me out with the paper route. But I really enjoyed the experience of being a paper boy, and it taught me some good things. And however, it made me accustomed to not applying myself in school quite so much. In the eighth grade, I remember that my father was into politics to a certain extent, and he was able to get me a job paging for the local state representative, who was, let's see, I was trying to think of his last name. His first name was Brad, and I like the name Brad, and I like Brad, and sure enough, our son, his middle name is Brad, and he's by the family and his friends growing up, he was always called Brad. His first name is David Brad Ewing. But anyway, it was Brad Dormany who was the representative in the area of Fitzgerald, Georgia, where my daddy lived. So he took me to Atlanta, and we stayed in the Piedmont Hotel in downtown Atlanta, and I paged for Brad Dormany. And in the eighth grade, our teacher was teaching Georgia history and had a project for us to turn in. and I was able to gather a huge amount of material on the state of Georgia, having paged in the House of Representatives, and was able to uh, be recognized for having an outstanding Georgia History Project book. I wish I had that book today. I found that I enjoyed doing things that were a little on the artistic side. And, I, I was able to do some painting and enjoyed doing that. And I do remember that I did something that I'm not proud of, but I guess I should admit it, is in the 11th grade, we had to have projects to go along with books that we read. And I had a collection of Classics Illustrated, which was to take great works of literature and to put them into a comic book format. So friends of mine would ask me to do their project for them, and I did several of them, so that what I would do is draw or paint a picture that represented their book from one of the Classics Illustrated front covers. So I would copy those, and more than half of the pictures that were on the bulletin board in that class were pictures that I had painted. I was so proud, but should be ashamed today of what I did for my fellow students. Anyway, yeah, my father and I stayed close. We're always close, and after I had quit my paper route, even before, whenever he was going on a trip around our area, because he sold a lot of insurance policies. He was a top insurance agent, and later became when I was in college, he was what they call agency director for his insurance company, State Mutual of Georgia. But he had been their number one salesman. And with that job, he moved to Atlanta while I was at Georgia Tech. And when he was in Atlanta, he said this. He said, "I can make more money accidentally than I can in Atlanta with this job on purpose." So he was not pleased with being an executive in that company. But back from an early time, even when I had the paper route, he would come by and pick me up, would call and say that he was in our area, and he'd pick me up, and I would go with him to visit clients, and he was selling insurance, but also sometimes he would need to go and encourage them to make their payments, which were called premiums on their policies. So I enjoyed traveling all over our county and adjacent counties with him when he was in our area. He lived in Fitzgerald, Georgia at that time, and after I was free to not be there every day with the paper route, from 8th grade on, it was quite frequent that I would visit him. He would take me to Fitzgerald for a weekend, or sometimes in the summertime it'd be a week-long visit that I would have. And I have a half-brother, Gaston Garner Ewing. My daddy also used relatives. In that case, it was my stepmother's favorite uncle, Gaston Garner, who my brother Skeeter was named for. So the name that most people know him by, of course, is Skeeter. And visiting there, I would do things with Skeeter, maybe read to him, play with him, and we got to be good friends over the years. And my sisters being a good bit older than me, I love my sisters dearly, always did, always have. But since I was 4 years younger than my youngest sister, 6 years younger than my older sister, we did not have much in common except that we were in the same family and had a lot of the same experiences down through the years, while our time at home overlapped while they were there. And by the time that I was a freshman in high school, they were off at college. So a lot of the formative years we were not together, but they were real smart and pretty, and I couldn't imagine my being able to have a wife that compared to them. I was not that confident in my own appeal or abilities, but I'm very grateful that I have a wife that there's nobody that is prettier or more talented, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most people, than my wife, June Brooks Ewing.
So, do you have anything else you want to mention from your childhood before we go into your married life?
Well, I should mention that when I was in about the 5th or 6th grade, a family moved in. The father was the county agent and advised farmers one thing about building ponds on their property. And he had access to a lot of different farms around Coffee County, Douglas, Georgia. And one of the sons was my age. His name was Arthur Cyrus Adams, and we called him Kai. And I was skinny and Kai was heavy. So we were some pair. And we were best friends for a good while growing up. Kai taught me about hunting, and one of our favorite things was to go frog gigging. Last time we went frog gigging, we saw more rattlesnakes than we saw frogs, so we didn't go much after that. On another group of my friends, and Kyle was not included, we had jungle hammocks that were from World War II, hammocks for keeping the mosquitoes out. It had a tent top on it and had a screen all around it. And I was camping out with this bunch of friends one time, and Kai came to where we were playing pinball machines at a place on the edge of town, and he said, I'm going to go see my grandparents in West Green, Georgia. And I'd been with him before, and they would go hunting, and we had an outhouse, and we had a bed that seemed like it was made out of straw, and it was just roughing it. It was like camping out to go to his grandparents. So I got with him, and we went and picked up my jungle hammock, and we had a nice weekend. But the next Monday at band practice, all my friends were in the band that I went camping with, and they subdued me. I didn't know what was happening, and they carried me out several miles out of town and left me to walk back home. Well, the first truck that came along, I got a ride back home. But what had happened is Kai had done a mean thing. I was surprised, and I had no knowledge of it. He had cut down the other guys' jungle hammocks, and they thought I was a part of it, and I had no no knowledge of it. Of course, I was easier for them to subdue than Kyle would have been. Kyle was tough as nails, so uh, and he was not in the band at that time. He had been, but he wasn't anymore. He was playing football. So anyway, that was a nice memory of growing up, and I did a lot of camping with those guys with our jungle hammocks. It's well worth having them. One adventure that I had probably about the 8th grade was good friends of ours were the Faircloths. Joanne Faircloth and my sister Betty Sue were close friends. They were best friends, and her father was Nipper Faircloth, and Nipper Faircloth had what would be an 18-wheeler today. I'm not sure it had 18 wheels. May have had 10. I don't know, but he would take products all around the country and transport things back to this area. So he asked me if I would like to go on a trip with him and his partner that shared the driving with him. And I said, "Oh man, that'd be great." So my mother said it'd be okay. So I went with him on a trip with his truck, and they had a little bed right behind the seats. That was all that they had in the cab. So I spent most of my time, whenever it was time to go to sleep, it'd be me sleeping up there behind the two drivers of the truck. We took up a load of watermelons and brought back, as I recall, a load of potatoes. And we went to, first time I'd seen Washington, D.C. We didn't stop. We just passed through Washington, D.C. And we went to Baltimore, Maryland. And Mr. Faircloth had a relative there in Baltimore, and it was one of the townhouses. And I think I slept on about the third or fourth floor in this straight up house. I had never seen anything like it, but row houses that they had there. And anyway, that was an unforgettable experience for someone that was probably about the summer of 8th grade that I did that. Okay, during high school, I was part of a quartet at Douglas High School, and then I sang in an operetta, Trial by Jury, of Gilbert and Sullivan. I was a barrister in that operetta, and then my mother remarried during my junior year, and she moved to Jacksonville, Florida. So for my senior year, I went with her down to Jacksonville, Florida, and I continued to sing down there, and was in another operetta, and did a little bit of solo work there. So I began to enjoy singing more, and we had a program called a minstrel, and my part in that was to sing Old Man River, which was quite a challenge, but something that I very much enjoyed doing.
You remember any of it?
Oh yeah.
Can you sing a little bit?
Yeah. The way that I sing it, that originally written, that colored folks work on the Mississippi, colored folks work while the white folks play, pulling those boats from the dawn till sunset, getting no rest till the judgment day. Then, Old Man River, that old man River. He don't know nothing. He don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along. That's enough.
Yay! I love it. Thank you.
Yeah, that was fun. I
Yeah.
always enjoyed singing and sang. Goodness, I've sung at that time, not today. What they do now, I don't know anything about, but back then, I've sung the bass parts in the Messiah. I've sung folk music. I've sung a lot of classical uh, church music, as well as just the popular church music. Anything from He Can Turn the Tides and Calm the Angry Sea, which was a popular song in its time. And I Believe for Every Drop of Rain That Falls, a Flower Grows, those popular songs. And then the Lord's Prayer, I've done that probably more than anything else. Anyhow, singing was always a hobby and pleasurable for me. I guess it took the place of painting, which I've not done any of since I was in high school to amount to anything. June has taken my place of doing any painting, and my daughter, of course, is an art teacher and does beautiful artwork. So
Thank you.
between June and me, we have passed on our artistic abilities to our daughter, and are so happy that she listen. Our daughter won art contests that everybody participated in when she was just in middle school. So she had that talent early on. She did different things and came back to art. So it's a great outlet for talent, and it's so important in engaging people, particularly young people, in an opportunity to express themselves.
So while we're on the topic of singing, tell me about when you were a evangelist singer. You were traveling around with an evangelist.
Yeah, when I started college at Georgia Tech, and I thought that I might become an engineer, and the reason that I went there was I had done pretty well in this huge high school down in Jacksonville, Florida, in math, and the top student there in math and I would get together, and we would look at Georgia Tech's, the Georgia Tech Engineer magazine at that time would have math puzzles in it, and we would work those together. And I enjoyed working complicated word problems that had no clue as to how it might be solved. So I said, well, how can I do that? And engineering appealed to me in that regard. Didn't become an engineer. Our son became an electrical engineer, which is the most challenging engineering that just about that you can do. So anyway, but between my hobby of painting and my interest in engineer, somehow those it's amazing how genetics works, and so pleased that I have progeny that doing a lot more in those regards than I ever thought about doing. So
So did you meet the evangelist at Georgia Tech?
No, well, I did. I was there, and while I was at Georgia Tech, I was there for 5 quarters, and while I was there, I did continue. I wasn't. I was still suffering from not thinking grades were very important. As long as I got by, I was a happy camper. Had been a good student since I was in the 5th grade at that time. So I did like working those math puzzles. So I would turn them in every time while I was at Georgia Tech, and never got a response until they tallied up to see who had got the most for the year. And I came in 3rd for the year. And I was awarded an ivory small slide rule. Slide rule preceded the calculators that we have today, but I still have that slide rule, and it's a proud possession and memory of working those problems. So anyway, I was going to a First Baptist Church of Decatur, Georgia, and it was there that I met Larry Painter, and Larry Painter was going into the ministry, and at that time he was speaking, preaching in different churches, would go around, and he was from Charlotte, and he sounded a lot like Billy Graham from the same region. And people said I sounded a lot like Beverly Shea. So we teamed up while we were at First Baptist Church of Decatur. We had a wonderful counselor there, Jean Hendricks, and she impressed both of us and impressed us that we should go to Mercer University in Macon, Georgia, which we did. But I said, well, what can I do? At that time, with the influence of Christ, and having impressed with having a life of service to others, more so than just with a straight engineer, I had come to believe that maybe teaching was the best course for me. And I wondered what in teaching would be able to use something that I liked very much, which was working complicated word problems. And it was like a game to me. And physics stood out as being a way to pursue that. So I said, I'll be a physics teacher. So that's what I became, a physics teacher. And at Mercer, I got more serious about grades, because you couldn't just coast along. At least I couldn't. And my grades got better and better, and they got really good in graduate school. So that was a transition. And Larry and I became a real popular revival team while we were at Mercer, and got lots of engagements all around Georgia for us to go, and he would preach and I would sing, and I was not real pleased with my part of that, because I would have to get with an accompanist and practice before we did several presentations. And Larry knew his sermons, and he would go play golf with the local minister while I was working. And of course, the preacher got paid about twice as much as the evangelist, but I never complained. Just glad to be there and glad to be able to make a contribution. But anyway, we had quite a run of it at some big churches and little churches. So anyway, that was a lovely experience. And let's see, when I graduated from Mercer, I didn't even look for a job. One of my best friends, and we had studied together, was a math major, and his name was Max Ragland. And my first memory of Max was where we had our physics classes, there had been a leak in a natural gas heater. And I think one of the maintenance people came in and maybe lit a cigar or a cigarette, and the building almost exploded. But it knocked Max on the floor, and Max was on the floor, as I recall. He was not saying pleasant things, and the teachers said, run, get out of here. So we left the building very quickly, and fortunately it didn't hurt anybody, but it was a very close call that we had together with Max. Anyway, Max was working in Forest Park, Georgia, as a math teacher. And he called me and said that there was a position available that suited my double major in math and physics, and would I like to come work there? And without even looking for a job, I took that job, not realizing that money was important. And I made about as low a salary as imaginable. At that, I think it was $2,900 a year.
Wow.
And this was 1959, so that would be a lot more money today. It might be 30,000 or something like that today. Went to work teaching there, and taught second course in Algebra 2, taught plane geometry, and taught physics. So I had a lot of work to do to get ready for those classes, which was a lot of fun. But the most fun was there was a beautiful middle school band director that was just starting in her first year. And I was dating different girls, but she was outstanding. And I didn't think I had a chance, because she had just lots of opportunities. Now, young people that were in college or just out of college, none of them could afford a Corvette. But her two favorite boyfriends, other than me, both had Corvettes. And here, I could hardly afford to buy me a white shirt to wear to class. Oh, how in the world? But anyway, she won't admit I did anything that impressed her. She's reluctant for stuff like that. But I was singing in a revival in Atlanta without Larry Painter. This was another preacher. So I took her as my guest to go to the revival with me while I was singing some solos. And she was raised in, she was a Southern Baptist, but she was raised in the Christian church, which is very similar. And her mother, that we call Momo, and her father, Granddaddy, they were pillars of their church. And the fact that I was a teacher because of the influence of wanting to be of service and to be of service like Jesus had been, then I think that more than anything else was in my favor. It certainly beat out a couple of Corvettes.
Yay, Jesus, for beating out Corvettes. And your singing probably didn't hurt either.
Yeah, my children appreciate that probably as much or more than June does. But be that as it may, I'm happy that it turned out. Very, very blessed that life has turned out the way that it has.
So you met her. How did you meet her? I guess. Is it how you saw her on campus? And
Yeah.
then was it like a
what
teachers gathering or?
Yeah, I had met her at teachers gathering, and I told her that I had played clarinet in high school, which I was probably the worst clarinet player imaginable. But I said that I still possess not the B-flat clarinet, the clarinet you see most people playing, but the E-flat soprano clarinet. And I couldn't play it anymore because on an instrument of that sort, the pads in those days were made out of leather, and the leather would dry out, and they would not close the holes, the valves on the instrument. So I said, would you be willing to repair my E-flat clarinet? And she said, I'll take a look at it. So the drum major, who was, he really showed off as a drum major. He would rear back and high step across the field and was ahead of the curve on being fancy stepping drum majors. So he was in my physics class, and somehow he knew about my clarinet. So the day that I brought the clarinet to school, I was headed over to the band hut because we had arranged for me to meet June at the band hut. And I said, I will bring my clarinet. So here I was going down the hall with my little, in its case, the little E-flat soprano clarinet. And the drum major says, look, guys, there goes Mr. Ewing with his E-flat soprano excuse.
Oh, he called you on it.
Oh, yes. I make no apologies for that. But the only other excuse I remember was mother lived in East Point, and she had to come to Forest Park to work, and it seemed like a long drive. So I said, I'll come show you a shortcut. I didn't know any shortcut. I probably got lost. But
did you find a shortcut so you could show her something?
Well, we were engaged pretty quickly, and we were married before the year was over. Got married on December the 20th of that year. So anyway, that worked out.
Yes.
And I remember when she took me to meet her mother and father, Momo and Granddaddy, that they were in the living room, and we were sitting around, and I said, I've got something I want to ask you folks. And her daddy said, well, I knew this was coming. So I asked for your mother's hand in marriage, Cheryl, at that time. So anyway, happy times.
So they gave permission.
I guess they did, because we followed through, and we had the wedding there in LaGrange.
If you have to.
Yeah. I remember there was one of Mother's friends that came to the wedding, and I had come out to sing before the wedding got started. And I think it was the wedding prayer. Heavenly Father, hear us as we pray here at thine altar on our wedding day. And then I went back in. And then Skeeter and Daddy were there at the wedding as well, which I was glad that they were able to make it. So Mother's friend, when I came back out to be the groom, Mother's friend thought that the groom had not shown up and she was marrying the singer. At least that's what she said.
She hadn't met you, apparently.
No, she hadn't met
That's
me.
funny. Well, I remember Mama told me that she thought it, she said, well, that happened pretty fast. When I interviewed her, she said that was pretty fast for them to get engaged and get married. She said, but I guess it worked out all right.
We were lucky.
Yeah.
I know that after we were married, we would meet at lunchtime, and we would go sit in the car, and the cars were parked right close to the building, looking in the windows of the building. You could see us out there in the car. And I got called to the principal's office. That's a bad influence on these students for you to be out there with your wife at lunchtime. So anyway, got called down.
Yep.
After Gemma and I were married, we went on a honeymoon, and we went to Fitzgerald, Georgia, our first night, and a neighbor of ours in Fitzgerald at my father's house said he wished he'd known we were there on our honeymoon. He would have played a joke on us. So anyway, that was our first night, and then we went down to these gardens near Silver Springs, and everything we saw was the most beautiful we'd ever seen in our life. We were just on cloud nine. And we got up in the middle of the night and went to the Waffle House, which we probably haven't done since. Just so excited. And then we go on down to my mother's home in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And that was sort of ticklish, being on our honeymoon with my mother and stepfather in the next room, and mother and Audrey Lewis, his nickname was Shorty, and they took us down to Key West. Only time I recall going down to Key West, but that was part of our honeymoon to be able to do that. I do remember that when I was in college on the working with the evangelists, that my mother had us to come down to her Baptist church in Fort Lauderdale to do a revival, me singing and Larry Painter doing the preaching. So that was a wonderful memory that I have. Okay, after we were married, and I continued to teach, and Gamma continued to be the band director, and she'll tell you in her part her success as a band director. She started students with no knowledge of music and no instrument, and at the end of the year they had got her band from several different schools that she brought together to have band practice with all of them once a week. They got the highest ratings possible at their district festival sort of thing that they had for the bands. So she was quite a successful and competent band director. The next year, I had asked for a raise, and I was denied a raise because although I had a double major in math and physics, I did not have a teaching certificate. So I looked for a job, and my mother uh, found one in, let's see, it was Pompano Beach, Florida, just north of Fort Lauderdale, as I recall. So we head down to Pompano Beach right before school was supposed to start, for me to start teaching in this huge high school there. And when I got there, Mother said, Max Ragland again, my buddy from college, had called, and Max said that when I talked to him, he said that he had found a job for me at Southern Tech. I'd be teaching at the college level with just a bachelor's degree, and I'd be making considerably more money than I would be making at Pompano Beach. Like went from 2,900 to 4,200 at Pompano Beach, and my goodness, it was astronomical, $4,800 at Southern Tech, which was a unit of Georgia Tech at that time. So back we go with our two cars pulling a U-Haul trailer, and by that time, June was pregnant with Cheryl. So we went back and took the job at Southern Tech, and worked there their last year at an old naval air base where they had their campus with old naval barracks. And we stayed there for their last year at that location in Chamblee, Georgia, and we moved to Smyrna, Georgia, where they opened up a campus in Marietta. So the school was in Marietta, and we lived in Smyrna, which is where Cheryl teaches art today. So things have a way of circling around. So I very much enjoyed teaching at Southern Tech, and while we were there, and I was there for 2 years on two different campuses as they moved from one to the other. And in the summer between, I had a National Science Foundation grant to study at East Tennessee State University, and that was fun to get away and to do that. And then after the next year, I had another NSF grant to study at Iowa State University, and then it was on to graduate school. June and I had planned to, as we were talking about our plans as newlyweds, and even before we were married, we were talking about going to graduate school and to continuing our education so that we could be better teachers. So I went there. The first year I was in the physics department and taught. I had a teaching assistantship, which means that you earn your pay by teaching. So I taught labs, and I also taught elementary courses. And then the next year I had done, I had been at the top of my class in the calculus and differential equations and those sorts of things, advanced calculus courses at Georgia. And I was doing better in the math than I was in the physics. So I said, shoot, I like math just as much. And my second year at Georgia, I was in the math department. and taught courses there. And then the next year, in order to continuing as a teacher, I decided to major in math and physics education. So for the next few years, I was in the education department and continuing to teach. Um, the last couple of years, I was part of a research project with the with the education department. They had a government grant to do a very extensive study, and they had lots of assistants that traveled around to gather data. So after Georgia, Gemma had taught in Winder, Georgia, our first year at Georgia, and then the next few years she was in the education department, taking courses primarily in applied psychology, human psychology, in order to become a reading specialist, which uh, goes from the vantage point of how you can help students with their psychological needs in order to be able to be a better reader. So it was from there that we began to apply for jobs, and a reading specialist was in very high demand. So June said, anywhere you can get a job, I can get a job. So I sent out resumes to lots of places that were looking for math and physics college teachers, and I had 16 offers. One of them was at the space port in Florida. It was Cape Canaveral and then Cape Kennedy, and now it's back to being named Cape Canaveral, I think. But there was a college there, which was very desirable to me to be that close to the space program. But we boiled it down to two colleges. One was Georgia Southwestern, where they were in the process of going from 2 years to 4 years. And we saw that as an opportunity to really do some good and to be part of making a program substantial by going to become a 4-year college. The other was at Emory University, and that was highly desirable because of its prestige. The salary wasn't nearly as good as Georgia Southwestern, but my goodness, I'd always heard in the southeast of Emory University being tops academically, and I had an opportunity there. So we made a list of the advantages and disadvantages of Emory and of Georgia Southwestern. June would have had a job there. Immediately she got a job paying almost twice as much as my job at Emory would have paid, but it would have been with the Fulton County Board of Education, and she would have had to travel all over Fulton, which is spread out all across Atlanta. She would have been traveling with that quite a bit. So the salary was desirable, and the responsibility for her was desirable, but the travel was very definitely not desirable. So that was a net negative for that, and my salary at Emory was a net negative, plus the desire to be able to be a part of something where the two of us could make a significant difference was a great appeal for America's Georgia. Plus, at that time, I had read Alvin Toffler's book. I believe the name was Future Shock, and it was about the desirability of raising a family in a college town, for instance. And the ideas there many years later were expressed by Hillary Clinton, and it takes a village. So idea of having a place to raise our family that was similar to Douglas, Georgia, where I was raised, and LaGrange, Georgia, where June was raised, both little college towns, and America's being similar. We said, we probably can't beat that. So that was our reason for our main reason for all things considered, for coming to America's Georgia and raising our family.
You and Mama talked about what you wanted your family to look like, how many children you wanted, pets or anything like that.
Yeah, June was not as interested in the concerns I had for the viability of the planet for human life as I was. So when I requested that we hold our family at 2 children, hopefully a boy and a girl, which very luckily that's what happened. She didn't want me to spread that to our children. That was something to do. So we do have 7 grandchildren for 2 children, which wouldn't take the world for any one of them. So very fortunate because we both have devoted our professions to trying to be helpful to young people, and certainly at home that carries over as well. And we have tried to do as much as we can to be helpful with our grandchildren. When Cheryl and Bill were homeschooling, then many times that we would go to their home, particularly in Trussville, Alabama, to help with the homeschooling. And it was always such a thrill to have let them know we were coming and to have the children to be at the out in the yard on the front steps or whatever, to be excited that we were there. So that was always nice. And much the same with Brad's children. They were not interested in homeschooling, but it was nice to spend time with them as well. And so many times when the Lane family was in Alabama and Brad's family were in Alabama, we would all get together, or we would visit one and then visit the other. And by that time, we had been retired for a number of years during the time that they were growing up. So that gave us the opportunity to be more active in our grandparenting jobs. They were pleasurable jobs and something we enjoyed doing.
So back up to you just got married, and do you remember when you found out you were having your first child?
Well, we were married December the 20th, and you came November the 4th. So we figured that after we saw that my half-brother Skeeter and I share the same birthday, November the 3rd, and Cheryl's birthday is November the 4th, I said, what occasion might that have been? And it turns out it was Valentine's Day. That probably was the time that all these that cluster around the first part of November, last part of October, that the conception was probably very close to Valentine's Day. So that was a pleasure to know and to understand. But we didn't find out, of course, for a couple of months. It was probably into probably June before we realized that Cheryl was going to be coming around the
So
1st
in those
of
days,
November.
did you have a home pregnancy test, or did you go to the doctor to?
Had to go to the doctor
Yeah.
to get it confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that that was soon enough in our marriage,
Yeah.
and
11 months.
it meant a lot to us to go ahead and start our family. Obviously, we were raised in close-knit families and appreciated that experience, and we both wanted that. So it worked out. Fortunately, that worked out.
So what is your, do you have a memory of when I was a baby, or when
Well, I
was
remembered that
young?
you were very, very active, and we had a walker, a child's walker that you would sit in, and it had 4 wheels on each corner, and before you could walk, you went everywhere in that. Just a streak of lightning going. And the first summer after you were born, that would have been you probably about 8 months old. We had the opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, of going to East Tennessee State University. We had an apartment there, and had your little scooter type of walker situation, and you hit a bump going into the bathroom, as I recall, and you made a split in your chin, and you had to have stitches. So we had to hurry you to the doctor, and we had already made an acquaintance with a family practitioner who was very, very friendly and understanding type of guy, and got you sewed up. And I guess that was your first experience with getting stitches. It was, for young parents, that was a very frightening situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Head wounds bleed a lot. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, I remember one of my earliest memories is of you taking care of me after I stepped on a bee. We were in Athens and living in
The prefabs.
the married student housing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember that, but I remember you scooping me up and taking me, and I had a bee sting on the bottom of my foot.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I don't remember that.
what about your?
I remember in Athens that one of the things that we didn't have in graduate school, we didn't have much time for recreation, but we would go to the Athens City Park, and they had ducks there, and we would take bread and feed the ducks. And I remember you being up on a park bench throwing bread out to the ducks, and they were just all gathered around you.
Yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah.
So what about baby number 2 coming along, and what was going on in your life when he was born?
Well, we were finishing up our own campus work. We still had to write our dissertations, but we were finishing up our campus work at University of Georgia for our terminal degrees. And Brad was born right when we were finishing up and about to come to Americus, Georgia. So I had bought an old Cadillac for my work with this project where I had to travel around the state doing educational research for my dissertation. And it was very comfortable, and it served us well in making our way back home with Cheryl and June and Brad. Brad was 9 days old when we made that trip from Athens to Americas in that smooth riding car. So that was our experience there. And pretty soon after we got here, one of my students had purchased a puppy for her little girl. But her little girl didn't understand about how you're supposed to treat a delicate little puppy. And the little puppy was scared to death. And we were able to inherit that puppy that became a member of our family, Peppy, a phantom poodle, and smart as a whip. So a couple of things about Peppy. June's parents thought of him as one of the grandchildren and would make sure we were taking good care of him and ask about him when we brought him to. So he was so excited when we'd be getting into LaGrange, and he would sense that we were there and be jumping all around the car as soon as we were a couple of miles away from their home. And they visited us in Americas, and we wanted Peppy to say goodbye, and we couldn't find him. And that little rascal had stowed away in the floorboard of their back seat of their car because he wanted to go home with his grandparents. But anyway, he was a wonderful little member of the family. One thing I remember about, we took Peppy on a trip that we made when Brad was about 5 years old and Cheryl was 9. We made a swing around the whole United States, going down to Mexico, cross the border into Canada, and then back around to visit my sister in Albert Lee, Minnesota, and then coming back home. But we hardly knew Peppy was there on the whole trip, but he showed up in half the pictures that we made, just right along with us. One of the neatest things about the trip, we won't talk about Cheryl's boyfriend that she made on the trip, but we'll mention that we had been watching sunsets as we were looking for a place to camp each night. We had this camper that probably weighed more than the car, which was a mistake. We spread car repair bills from one end of the country to the other, and I suffered in silence for thinking about the car and was it going to make it for half that trip with the rest of the family. But most enjoyable for all of us to go on that trip. And we would watch sunsets as we were heading west and looking for a place to camp. And we were setting up camp on one occasion. And here our little 5-year-old came running around the camper and says to everybody, come with me, hurry, because sunsets only last briefly, and he wanted us to see a beautiful sunset. So we felt like it, if nothing else, that was a successful trip because of engendering that love of nature in our children was important to us and to our children. But that was quite a journey, and we made a whole carousel of slides of our trip around the country, which we enjoyed for many years after that.
And we did a lot of camping, not just that trip, but one of our favorite family vacations was to go camping or to get away for a weekend to camp.
Yeah, we camped a lot at Roosevelt State Park. contiguous with Callaway Gardens. And we also camped a great deal in Florida. There is a peninsula out from Port St. Joe, Florida, that has a Florida State Park out on the tip of this peninsula. And it's at that time there had been zero development out there on the peninsula, and we thoroughly enjoyed the pristine nature of that area and taking hikes through the undisturbed resources that were there. And there was a beach, and there were plenty of things for us to do as a family out there. So lots of different places that we went camping, some of them more memorable than others. Mm-hmm. But that was our family
So
thing.
do you have a memory of when Brad was little?
Well,
Besides the sunset was a cute example.
Yeah.
Any other?
Well, one thing, as he was growing up, he loved playing the trumpet as he got into his middle years in school, and he loved going with his sister to practice with America's Highest Singers and listening to them and being a little bit of a mascot for them. And he saw that that's something he wanted to do. And on the trumpet, he got to be a star trumpet player by his senior year in high school. And in so many of the bands at that time, they would have a battle of the bands. And a lot of times it'd be the best trumpet player in one band that would play a solo, and then the best trumpet player in the other band during the halftime would play a solo. So Brad enjoyed doing with that, and he did go with the band to Washington, D.C. When Jimmy Carter was inaugurated as President of the United States.
Well, I did that. I don't know if Brad was there. I played in the President's Band.
Oh, that was you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Brad played in the band at Disney World.
Yeah.
They made a trip to Disney World.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
And he also was in the Singers. He's a great singer too.
Yeah. He continued that with his church group. That he was in a quartet, and they made recordings. We have recordings, and he did some solo work with them, but primarily as a good part of the quartet. And when he got to this particular church in Madison, Alabama, after he became an electrical engineer, they had an orchestra in the church, and he was going to join the orchestra, and he was listening to the others play, and each one of them played their instrument. They asked him to play, and after he got through playing, they said, there was a silence, and then they said, "Where did you go to high school?" Because they would have known him in the area from his playing.
Right.
And when he started college, he spent a year at Georgia Southwestern, where Jay Clyde, the best of calculus teachers, could give him a good foundation in calculus before he went off to Auburn. But he had a music scholarship to Georgia Southwestern at that time. But as I think about it, before I forget, we talked about Habitat for Humanity and Jimmy Carter coming to, Jimmy and Rosalind going to Japan, and they did have Sheraton come to a luncheon that they held. And there were, how many people were there, Cheryl? Not many.
It was a former Prime Minister of Japan, Fukuda, and his wife were there. The U.S. ambassador to Japan was there.
Yeah.
And there were a few key Diet members that were part of the legislature in Japan. And the Amos is
Yeah. John.
there.
Yeah. John Amos was probably the founder of Aflac. You've seen the commercials with the duck and the Aflac.
Yeah.
That's John Amos, and of course John Pope, one of Jimmy's lifetime good buddies, but best friends, was good friends with John Amos. So all of them financially well off and great supporters of Jimmy Carter and whatever Jimmy Carter was doing that was beneficial to humanity. They were behind him, I think, pretty much at the time. So that was quite a group, Cheryl.
Yeah.
And when Cheryl got back to work and was able to tell them to verify that she was telling the truth about meeting with Jimmy Carter, after so much pushback from her colleagues, there was particularly in her church, was it Tokyo Baptist Church, that they were interested in what Cheryl had been doing and how she knew Jimmy Carter so well. And she mentioned Habitat for Humanity and the building of houses for people in need. And they got interested in Habitat. So Cheryl calls back to Americas at the headquarters of Habitat for Humanity and says, where is the closest project to Tokyo? And it was in the Philippines. And Cheryl was able to get together a group of people from her church, probably a couple of dozen people from her church that went to the Philippines, and over a period of a couple of weeks, they were able to build several houses. How many do you remember?
9. We built 9 houses in 3 weeks.
9 houses, how many?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. So that turned out to be quite eventful, more so than just meeting with a dignitary on Cheryl's part, but she was able to capitalize on that in a wonderful way and establish a project. While I'm thinking about it, I better mention that all the time Brad was from middle school on not only interested in trumpet, but he was also interested in electronics. And he did a project in school, and where they have science projects in middle grades. And when he came home, he told his mother, I'm going to be an electrical engineer. And whenever we would go to through a town, out of town, we didn't have an outlet in Americas, but he would see in a storefront a Radio Shack, and that was his toy store. And we would have to go into the Radio Shack, and he would get whatever he wanted for a project that he might want to do. And one thing he learned, some of them didn't work, was to be careful of cold solder joints. If you don't get a good connection, then on every time you try to get two things to contact each other, if it's cold, it won't work. And anyway, a lot of that carried through, that he was programming in what they call machine language before he was out of high school, from things that he had learned from books that he got at Radio Shack. And back in those days, space on computers was very expensive and limited. It's not so much today, but to limit your space on a computer, then if you could go directly to the language that the machine understood, then you could save a lot of space on the computer. So he was doing that before he got to Auburn. I remember that he was sort of like his daddy in that he was not a grade hog going through undergraduate so much. And he was in the student center. one time, and there were all these top students. Say, I would say something like 6 or 8 students that were part of a very prestigious academic club at Auburn, and he overheard them talking about their computer course and programming or coding in the computer. And he said, how many of you did all of these yourself, all these special projects yourself? Like when I was in graduate school, it was 10 projects that we could do and get 100%. And I had that a notion of doing that. It was too late for me to switch, but they said do 10, you get 100%. I did all 12 of them, so I know where he was coming from, and all of them except for one girl in the group had cheated and got them from somebody else, and these were the top students. And here Brad had, of course, done all of them, and he said, yeah, we know how a lot of these folks get their grades. There was another course where the teacher was fresh out of an Ivy League school, and he was teaching linear algebra, and he was just so good, he thought of himself that half the class was gone by midterm. And there was one other guy in the class that Brad thought was doing as well as Brad was. And at the end of the course, Brad got the top grade. He got a C. Now the good students, the Dean's List academic students, had all quit by that time. They knew what to do to maintain their high grade point average. But Brad said, I'm not going to waste my parents' money. I'll just stick it out. He got his C, and he saw this other student that he thought knew pretty well what was going on as well. The other student got a D, and those were the top grades in the class.
Oh my!
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, I've run across teachers like that
Yeah.
as well that were so egotistical that they built their ego off of the putting their students down, and
Yeah.
I always resented that. Somebody
They weren't there to help the students.
in my
They were there to
profession,
discourage them.
well, they were too busy writing research papers, and
Yeah.
students were a distraction from what they were there for. From the time that I first got to know Millard and Linda, in our private conversations, I had prevailed upon Millard to have an environmental component for Habitat for Humanity, and not realizing the need for that, which I was not able to convey at the time to Millard in our encounters. He said, well, you need to start your own organization. I started mine. and I said, I am not Millard Fuller. So anyway, down through the years, I would bring that up, that he needed to have this component. So when Al Gore was running for vice president with Bill Clinton, Millard saw a group of men jogging on the beach, and Millard was jogging on the beach going in the opposite direction. And he wondered about this group of men. And he looked, and Al Gore was in the middle of them, and these were his bodyguards that were accompanying him. So Millard turns around and catches up with them and tells the bodyguard, tell Al Gore it's Millard Fuller. So he told him, and Al brought him up, and Al gave him a copy of his new book, Earth in the Balance, which is about the environment. And I had heard Al Gore speak on the environment some years before at Callaway Gardens, which is beside the point. But anyway, I knew of his environmental interest and had talked to him about our common interest early on. So anyway, I gave him an autographed copy, and Millard read the whole thing. And as soon as he put it down, he called me up and said, David, are you ready to retire? So I wrote up my resignation and retired pretty quickly after that to start an environmental component for for Humanity. And my immediate superior was a fan of Rush Limbaugh. And he said, Millard gets these crazy notions every now and then, and we will humor him. This guy evidently thought he was always the smartest guy he himself was the smartest guy in the room. So he was able to placate Millard long enough to get this out of his system. And he said, I'll give you a 1-year contract to do this. And I lasted 14 months with pay. And I was being pretty successful and had outlined something to do and with the environment, and had gone to that summer before I was hired. I had gone to the Jimmy Carter work camp in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and they had made the buildings follow a very strict environmental code that Canada had developed. And about the middle of the week, they said, we're going to see the Habitat Restore. I had written Millard already about having a thrift store that dealt in furnishings for houses and having building materials and things that were appropriate for putting a house together in good shape, and sold no clothes. Leave that to Salvation Army and Goodwill, but no clothes in a Habitat Restore. Just things that were appropriate for building and putting together houses or homes for people. So this was something I had written to him in response to his having written me about having surplus materials that were donated that were too much for the affiliates in the area to use. And I said, well, shoot, if you had a thrift shop that dealt in these sort of materials, then that would be great. So in the middle of the week, Winnipeg had already done that, and it was called a restore. And I was coming on board with Habitat, and I said, would it be okay if I took your document saying how you put this together and duplicated that and sent it to our affiliates throughout the United States? So they okayed it. They had a beautiful logo. I said, can I use your logo? Yeah, they said, fine, we want to promote the restore. So I applied for a grant, and I got a monetary grant to support me in the restore. And by that time, I had made an attempt, my superior, to fire me from being head of putting together an environmental component. And I said, you paid me the lowest wage to begin with that was allowable for a person in my position. You had a range, and you chose the lowest number since evidently you didn't think this was important. But I have a lot of speaking engagements lined up, and I didn't come for the money. So if you would allow me to stay as a volunteer and continue to do my speaking engagements, then that'd be fine with me. Just let me stick around. So it was after that I got the grant, and I was able to, I said, I'm going to make videos and send them to all the viable affiliates that we have in North America. Well, part of this was I needed to see more restores, and by that time, it was about 2 years after I'd first started promoting them that we had restores in San Antonio and Austin and Dallas and Fort Worth, 4 successful restores. So I called the guys in Canada, and there were 2 of them there that had been instrumental in the restore there. And I said, would you like to meet me in Texas at the Dallas-Fort Worth airport? And we will tour these restores in Texas and see how they're doing and document their progress, and I'll be able to put together a video. So they met me there, and we traveled up and down the big interstate through the middle of Texas. And when we got to uh, uh, goodness, I mean
San Antonio, Austin.
Austin. It was Austin. In Austin, they had named all of them had named them the Restore, and the one in Austin was very successful. In fact, they had a couple that had collected building materials over a 2-year period and had built their house from the resources in the in their Restore. And anyway, they had made a video already documenting that. So here I had a manual, and I said, you know what I'm going to say? Can I use your video? So they did let me duplicate their video. So I got back home, and after my experience with these successful Restore operators and the folks from Canada, I put together an introduction to this video that Austin let me use. And I had Millard to give this speech of an introduction, and I blew up the Restore logo and put behind him on a piece of 4x4 plywood that our department that was in charge of making posters and things to do for us. And he gave the speech, and they said that he changed one word in the speech that I had put together, which was a high compliment for a person caliber of speaker of Millard, for him to honor what I had put together. And in that I said that we may end up like, sort of paraphrasing my daddy, I said we might be able to build more houses accidentally with the Restores than we do on purpose with the traditional aspect of habitat. And sure enough, today we have some very successful Restores down through the years. I'm not don't have access to the actual numbers, but there's some of the Restores that have a cash flow of a few $1 million a year in places like Asheville, North Carolina, a huge one there, very successful. One a couple in Canada that have a cash flow in the millions. And we've got Restores now throughout Canada, North America, and Australia. And it's well over 1,000 of them. And if you look at the cash flow, it's at least $500 million a year that they have. And although I haven't been the impetus behind their continuation, at least I started something that gives me a great deal of satisfaction to know that I had a hand in getting that thing to become a viable and very important aspect of Habitat for Humanity.
And the money that they make goes into building more houses for
for
poor people, right?
Yeah,
all of that.
They build houses with the materials. They keep up Habitat houses that have already been built with the used and surplus building materials, and and as you say, it creates the money for them to build Habitat houses with no interest loans and with sweat equity and all the things that go along with the Habitat for Humanity traditions. And we have been involved over the years with Millard Fuller was dismissed. I know when I was there were those that talked about it being, it was no longer a mom and pop organization, talking about Millard and Linda. And I sort of resented that, having been pretty much their dear friends of ours down through the years. But Millard was, through what we think to be trumped up charges, he was dismissed from Habitat. They found a way to. The real reason for his dismissal was that the board of directors did not like coming to Atlanta and then finding a way to make it to Americus, Georgia, which was really an imposition for, and the board of directors developed into, it started off that we were lucky to get prominent people to be part of the Habitat board. But after the years rolled on, it became very desirable for a person to put that on their resume. After Jimmy Carter's involvement and Habitat becoming a household word pretty much worldwide, then that was a feather in their cap. So they began to get people, I think, this is my personal opinion, and that of a few others, that they began to get people that were more interested in the prestige of being that than they were in the actual mission of Habitat for Humanity, and took more of a business person's approach, a successful captain of industry approach to Habitat, rather than the charitable heart of Habitat that was manifest in Millard and Linda Fuller. So they saw that, and Millard, always the idealist and always the salesman, and trying to go to the next level with the traditional mission of Habitat. They saw that as a hindrance to what they wanted to do from the corporate world in order to make Habitat a bigger thing. But I think those ideas have proven not to be as viable as they thought they would be. And
So Millard, though, turned it into something
yeah,
good. He
yeah,
moved on and started another organization.
that's right. The Fuller Center for Housing. He tried the name of Building Habitat, but Habitat objected that. He was going to use it as a forum for him to continue to promote Habitat with his tremendous ability to speak convincingly and to get people involved. So Habitat said, no, we don't want our name, and we'll sue you if you use our name. So I talked to Millard and I said, Millard, your name, Millard Fuller, has currency. And I don't know that I had the major influence, but I probably joined a chorus of people that encouraged him to use the Fuller name. So it became the Fuller Center for Housing. And June was a member of their first board of directors and continued in that role for several years. And I got to go to board meetings with her and enjoy the company of these people that were involved. And when they had their board meetings, then I would read a book, or sometimes go on a bike ride, or something of that sort. But I always enjoyed being associated with that as one of the first husbands.
We did some work camps, and you did more than I did, I think, with the Carters, and did some.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
We Jimmy Carter became very much involved with Habitat for Humanity after he retired unexpectedly from the presidency, and he would have a work camp for Habitat, a week-long work camp where Jimmy and Rosen were workers. Jimmy had as a hobby of his woodworking and enjoyed building and building furniture and just when he left the presidency, his staff gave him all the ingredients for a workshop that he located at his garage, I guess, in Plains, Georgia, next to his house. And he's continued down through the years to build things, and particular furniture that he would auction off at his house, from his house workshop in Plains. But he enjoyed the work with Habitat. Once every year he would have a week-long, highly publicized work camp, and had dignitaries of all famous people to participate in those with him. And the first one that he had was a tenement in Lower East Side in New York City that had been ravaged, maybe burned out, but abandoned tenement that still had, as a realtor would say, for a place that looks terrible, a realtor would say, but it's got good bones. Well, this building had good bones, and we completely refurbished it. And that was the first of his projects that happened annually from then on. And Cheryl went with June and I to that project. And I remember a good friend of ours, John Pope, who was very wealthy. He and his wife both had come from great wealth. And John was a builder, and John was one of the founders of Aflac. So that was quite a source of resources for him. So he goes up to the roof, and John had been one of Jimmy Carter's very best friends down through the years. And anyway, there are lots of stories about John, but that's in history books. So I'll tell you this. He goes up to the roof and he sees what they were going to put on the roof. And he says, I know a better product to do this. And they say, well, we've already got our budget in line and we know what we're going to pay for this, and that would be much more expensive. And John says, forget about it. I'll buy it. Anyway, after we got the roof down, John was making sure, and I was up there with him working. And John, at that time, was noted for being able to stand on his head, and he was a very strong and capable person. So he was leaning out over the edge of this relatively tall building. And I said, John, you need to hold on to me. Let me hold on to the chimney back here, and I'll hold your hand. Mm-hmm. And he said, I don't need to hold your hand. And I said, John, I need for you to hold my hand, yeah. which he did, as he was being a little reckless in my estimation.
I remember that. I remember seeing him leaning over, and he had his legs straight, leaning over flat-footed up way down.
Yeah.
I can still see that in my mind's eye, because that scared me too.
Yeah. Well, prior to our going on that work camp, we had Millard and Linda Fuller had not yet met John and Betty Pope. So we had both couples to come to our house for supper one night so that they would get to know each other. And that greatly benefited the Habitat for Humanity, both for their participation in the projects and also for their financial support of the project. So we did a few good things along the way.
Yeah.
And that was one of them.
So what else about Habitat?
Well, I had been, Millard had a board of directors and a board of advisors. And when Habitat first started, it's so popular now that it's not unexpected for people to go to Facebook or Twitter and to find something that they can have a conspiracy theory and make up a lot of negative things and generate actual hatred. So when Habitat started, there was local folklore that the people really didn't own those houses that Habitat was building. Millard Fuller was known to have come from making a lot of money. He had been a millionaire, which was unusual in those days. And he owned the houses, and though the houses looked good, they all had dirt floors. And just on and on with conspiracy theories, which we know have become a popular thing today, of all sorts of things going on. So I went around, I got together a slide presentation, and I went around to civic clubs and men's church groups and WMUs maybe, but all around the community to spread the word about the truth of Habitat and to show pictures of what was going on with Habitat. So one of the first slide presentations that Habitat had was the one that I was able to do to combat erroneous and detrimental conspiracy theories here in our own county. But in later years, Millard took on the project of showing that you could eliminate project housing in a community by taking this county that had started off so negatively in regard to Habitat and eliminate completely poverty housing throughout the county, which everybody welcomed and had with open arms this project. And it was such a magnanimous thing of Habitat, and for Millard particularly, to not hold a grudge and to do something positive for what became his favorite community, his home community. So, and of course, Millard had started Habitat on the basis of the philosophies of Clarence Jordan at home at Cornelia, and a lot of the ideas for Habitat had come from Clarence Jordan, and Millard Fuller was his number one apostle in bringing those ideas. You got together this great theologian and philosopher, Clarence Jordan's ideas, with this tremendous, the best salesman probably the world has, among the best the world's known, I feel sure. The reason I say that is June went with the Carters, with the Fullers, when they first started Habitat in Canada. She was with them in a borrowed van that they traveled, and they were with us the night before they left, and June just decided that they asked her to go, and she went. And I checked out that van, and the tires were slick on it, and I was very apprehensive about them going. But anyway, on the way there, they stopped at Chautauqua in New York. And during the week, Millard and Linda were off with dignitaries, and June was many times by herself, well, enjoying all the features of Chautauqua, which kept her busy. And she met up with two ladies and they said, we have been coming to Chautauqua since we were very young, and like they'd been coming for 30 or 40 years. And they said Millard Fuller was the best speaker that they had ever heard. So I remember one time I had a family of lawyers that went on my tour in Plains, and I made it so that it was very complimentary of Jimmy Carter. But on this particular tour, the family of lawyers got interested in what I had mentioned something about the environment, and they wanted to pursue that. So I pretty much laid it on them, and then they afterward went to Jimmy Carter's first cousin, Hugh Carter, and told him that Jimmy needed to take me to Washington with him. So Hugh asked me if I was interested, and I said, I don't think so. I'm very happy raising my family here, and this is not the time for me to abandon the small town and go to the business in Washington. So that was complimentary. Hugh Carter's son, I think, had been in charge of finding people to fill various positions in the administration of Carter, as new presidents are expected to do. So that was an opportunity that was not of much interest to me, but I was complimented that I was even given that small amount of consideration. Let's see, the relationship with Jimmy Carter developed with Habitat, that Millard Fuller got Jimmy Carter interested, and he met with him personally and emphasized Habitat to him. And even before that, Rosalind Carter had come to a new Habitat headquarters, which was in the law office that Millard had. And as she was looking around, I was the person that she knew from before, and she told me about a project, I think it was in Texas, where they had designated homes that had charitable service to help them build a home. And she said they painted the doors a certain color on all the homes that had been promoted by the charity, and said Habitat might want to do something like that. So anyway, I remember that being about the first time that Carter had shown an interest in Habitat with Rosalind visit, and I had known Rosalind for many years, along with Jimmy Carter. And when they organized the Maranatha Baptist Church in Plains, that this was organized when Jimmy was running for president, that Plains Baptist Church did not allow blacks to attend the services. So a new church was organized that was open to all people, regardless of race. So that was Maranatha. And over the years, I have sung at Maranatha Baptist Church on many, many occasions. And I remember Miss Leon's favorite song of mine was He Touched Me. Shackled by a heavy burden, neath a load of grief and pain, then the hand of Jesus touched me. And now I'm no longer the same.
I'd rather hear you sing it.
Shackled by a heavy burden, neath a load of grief and pain, then the hand of Jesus touched me, And now I am no longer the same. He touched me. Oh, he touched me. And so on. So Miss Leon often complimented me on that. And one day, Miss Leon was in the hospital, and I knew about that. And I was due to be on the Roselle show out of Columbus, Georgia, early one morning. So I got word to Miss Leon that I was going to designate or dedicate He Touched Me to her during that song. So she had her television turned on in her hospital room so that she could hear her favorite song of mine. So that was special to be able to do that for her. And anyway, down through the years, Rosalind and Jimmy both have been very complimentary of the contribution that I was able to make in a small way to their church services in Plains, Georgia. But that was pretty special to be able to do that to Jimmy, because our whole family have very much been supportive of him and his personification of what would be expected of a person who was living a life that Christ would have expected a Christian to live. I remember Jimmy talking one day in church about he had the leaders of the Southern Baptist Convention in his office, and one of them, it may have been the president of the Southern Baptist, pulled him aside and asked him when he was going to stop being something like a humanist and become a real Christian. And Jimmy went home that night, he said, and he asked Rosalind what this designation was that this person had given him. And anyway, it was secular humanist or something like that. I forget the terminology, but it was supposedly not complimentary of a Christian to be so designated. And it was very spiteful and little and judgmental for this supposed Christian leader to put on another person. It was certainly antithetical to judge not that you be not judged, and it was not the type of thing that you would have expected Jesus to do to another person.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So one thing that I remember, you asked Rosalind to check on me when they went to Japan.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So during a service, or some of the time that I was going to Maranatha Church, and probably went to about as many services there during that time as I did to our churches in Americas. They had mentioned they were going to Japan, and I said to Rosalind that she knew Cheryl, that they had worked together in the Carter campaign, and I said, you remember Cheryl? Oh yeah. And I said, she's now in Japan and you're going to Japan. It would be wonderful if you could see her while you were in Japan. And sure enough, Cheryl says that she told the people at work that she was going to be meeting with Jimmy Carter, and they accused her of a prevarication. That there was no way that was true, because they knew everything Jimmy Carter was going to be doing, and Cheryl was not included. And turns out Cheryl did have, was it lunch you had with Jimmy and Rosalyn Carter, and
Yes, I appreciate you telling her to check on me while they were there.
well, of course, this college president from Douglas contacted my mother and said how he was so disappointed that he thought I was coming and I didn't come. So, and mother said, you didn't treat him right, and
Yeah.
you're looking for a job. You
Right.
try to
Balance
put
out
the
all of it.
things up there
Yeah.
and make a decision. So, one of them was at Auburn. It was hard to
Yeah.
to make those decisions, and I think it was a time when a lot of colleges were expanding their resources. Did you?
Well, I remember you saying that you also thought about it being in between Douglas and LaGrange.
Oh, yeah.
So the location
Yeah.
of Americus was also like ideal,
Yeah.
equidistance between
Right.
Gemma's
Yeah. I
parents.
still had family in
and-
Douglas, and
and Fitzgerald.
mother and grandmother were there, and
Mhm.
my father in Fitzgerald, and brother Skeeter in Fitzgerald. So, yeah, and just so many things about Americus that,
Yeah.
and we've not regretted it. It's been good to us,
Mhm.
and
Y'all
as
pillars of the community here.
as you'll find
Over the
out from
years.
June, that
Mhm.
we've done our share both at the college and outside of the college with the community.
Mhm.
There have been a few of us at the college, a precious few,
Mhm.
that have taken the interest in the community that that we have. We're not proud that we're the few. We wish more had,
Mhm.
because there were plenty of capable people that could have been more helpful in the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
But that was something that we both, Gemma won't admit it, but we're a lot alike in, in the things that we have always wanted to do. And I'm proud that we're similar. There was one time when we took June's uncles, Uncle Charlie and Uncle Merle, to Callaway Gardens. They had never been, and they just were amazed. I remember Uncle Charlie saying, I didn't know this was here, and I didn't know this and that. At the end of the day, Uncle Charlie said that you two are the most alike of any couple that I've known. So anyway, I'm delighted with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have a lot of the same ideals and goals, and you love doing things, and
Right.
being out in the community, being on the lake.
Okay. Are we still on?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. One of the things that I did early on at Southwestern when we went to a four-year college was I wanted to, I knew from my experience in high school that the high school physics teachers didn't know much about physics. And usually it'd be the coach. And I don't know but what the administrators mixed up physical education with physical science. But probably they knew more than that. But the coach would teach it, and they didn't do a very good job of it. And a lot of the time it was just more of a study hall than it was a physics class. So I wanted to see more qualified high school physics teachers. So I looked at successful programs. There was one in Kentucky that impressed me, and they would have students that majored in history or English or physical education. They would have them take a number of physics courses, maybe 4 or 5 physics courses, and then they would have a background capable of teaching in high school. I looked at the statistics on how many courses in physics high school physics teachers had, and it would be most of them had maybe one course in physical science, and some of them had no courses that related to the physical sciences, much less physics. So I figured if we could have them have a minor, they were majoring in English and had a minor in physics, then they would have some in their background and be able to do a credible job. So with that in mind, I became a salesman to my students in class that, listen, if you get certified in physics, there's hardly any place in the country that has legitimate physics teachers. It's not just Georgia. So if you do this, then you can get a job anywhere teaching in high school. You want to teach history, then you'll say, okay, I can also teach physics, and you'll be at the top of the list of being able to be employed. So anyway, we raised, at that time, while that program was viable, we produced more physics teachers at Georgia Southwestern than the rest of the state put together. Now that sounds like a lot of physics teachers that were certified. I think the most was maybe 5 physics teachers per year that we produced, but and nobody else was doing it.
Yeah.
So at the University of Georgia, the physics department got together with the science education department, and they decided that in order to produce more physics teachers, they need to increase the amount of physics credits that they had. Well, they got that passed with the State Board of Education, and it destroyed our program. And I went to a meeting where they were deciding that. And they asked if there were any questions at that meeting. Well, I made my way up to the podium and I told them what had happened and what to expect. And I said, if you do this, you won't have any qualified high school physics teachers. And it came to pass. And I think what happened were the science education people at Georgia were so impressed that the physics department, a lot of physicists are rather arrogant about what they do. And I felt like that had happened, and they were just so excited that the physics department would have a project with them that they went along with this ignorant way to go about producing qualified and effective physics teachers. So anyway, that was a big disappointment to me and to the other 2 physicists in our department. They were Frank Jones and Don Norman that I had known in graduate school, and I knew Frank was an excellent teacher because whenever I had a problem, Frank was ahead of me, and Frank tutored me, and he was the best teacher in physics that I had. So I said, shoot, if I can get Frank to come. So Frank was at the college in Darton College in Albany, and we were at a meeting together, in Atlanta, and he was going to get a taxi to go to the airport and catch a plane to go to Albany, one of these shuttle planes. And I said, well, I'll take you to the airport. So I talked to him on the way to the airport, and I told him I knew the way, which of course, again, I got lost. But I got Frank to come to Americas, and Frank was always a dear friend. And he passed away during the past, I'd say, 2 years ago. But he had him as a member of our coffee club with the folks here in town that I have coffee with now. Try to have it once a week. But we took a break during the COVID epidemic, and we've had a few meetings since then. But that's a lot of fun to get together with the guys. One thing that June and I did when we were dating and after we got married was we were matchmakers, and there were two of our friends at Forest Park High School that we matched up with two of her roommates. We matched up Betty Ragland, her roommate, that she'd been a roommate of June's in college for a while, and also after they began teaching, they were roommates. And Max was a roommate of mine, and after we were teaching, so they got together and were married. And also Robert Cofield and Peggy Robinson, we matched them up, and after they had their first date together, I don't think they dated anybody else until they got married. So we matched up personalities pretty well.
Yeah, you did.
So
Well,
and
y'all stayed friends your whole lives.
Yeah.
Lifelong friends. I remember getting together.
oh yeah,
Families
Yeah.
we'd get together for little weekend trips and vacations together with those two families too.
yeah. It was amazing how after graduate school we had sort of gone into lockdown in graduate school, and it was real challenging for both of us. So we had sort of lost contact with, with Max and Betty and Robert and Peggy. So when I came to Southwestern, I was popular as a singer, and in fact, the dean of students had me to join Kiwanis Club. It was very rare for any faculty member other than the administrators. The academic dean and the president were allowed in civic clubs, but it was today the enrollments are way down in civic clubs and in churches. It's much the same the interest people have today in civic responsibility and what have you. But back then, it was you really had to be special to be in Kiwanis or Rotary. So the dean came to me and said, you've become a pretty popular singer around these parts, and I think it'd be good for the college for you to be in Kiwanis. Well, I had to pay my own dues. The president, the dean, and captains of industry around and entrepreneurs, they managed to have their companies to pay, but I haven't minded all through the years to pay my own way in Kiwanis, and it's been a great experience to be part of a group that their reason for existence is to be helpful in the community, and particularly with children, with Boy Scouts and with Key Club and Circle K and those different arms of Kiwanis that they have to work with different age groups. It's a wonderful organization, and that's been very important to me to be part of that. So let's see. We need to take a break while I think a little bit.
Let's. Can you tell me about Kiwanis some? I mean, what you've done in Kiwanis?
Okay.
I know. I remember the big thing I remember from childhood is the Walk for Mankind.
Yeah.
But I know you've done lots of things in Kiwanis. So while you're talking about Kiwanis, tell me just about a couple of things you've done.
Okay. With Kiwanis, one of the first things was I organized a Kiwanis quartet sort of thing that we would sing in the club, and I was song director for a lot of the time in our local club. Then I learned about A Walk for Mankind. I went to Macon, where they had a presentation by I think it was Jim and Molly Turpin, who were two MDs that had worked among the boat people in Hong Kong, and had established a clinic there for them. And they would have young people to come work with them, and they would select those that were very talented and bright, and would teach them what to do in the clinic and how to handle most of the problems. Something like 95% of the problems that people would have health-wise, that after a couple of years working with the physicians that the Turpins would have, they would be able to handle the medical problems. And when it was the ones that were more complicated, more demanding, then they would be able to send that other, say 10% to hospitals that were close by. So they were establishing clinics in third world countries quite frequently, and Walk for Mankind was a way to support that. So I became involved with that as a director of our local Walk for Mankind, and we raised quite a bit of money for our area, for the size of our area. You would say you would make a bargain with a donor that you would pay me by the number of miles I would walk, and the walkers, young people primarily, would be so inspired by the program that they would walk the whole 20 miles, and a donor would say, oh, they won't be able to walk 5 miles, but we'd end up, here's the bill for they walk 15 or 20 miles, and we raised a lot of money for our area at that time, in the neighborhood of, say, $20,000. And that was back in the early 70s, which would be double or triple that today. So after the second year, we would send in reports, and for our size of county, we were raising more per capita than any other Walk for Mankind in the state, and we had lots of ancillary things going on to promote the walk. I know the first year that we had it, I had Jimmy Carter's mother, Miss Leah Carter, to be our keynote speaker at our celebration banquet after we got through with the walk and were honoring the outstanding walkers. And the Walk for Mankind, after we had shown that we had, for our community, done an outstanding job in raising the funds, we sent in our report, and we were recognized for having the #1 Walk for Mankind project in Georgia, and also the #1 Kiwanis project in Georgia for that year. So that was unique in the experience of the America's Kiwanis Club to have that sort of recognition. And I remain proud of that to this day.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that was good. So down through the years with Kiwanis, whatever the projects were, and there were many, then I was a participant. For the Walk for Mankind, I became the statewide director for the Walk for Mankind for a couple of years, where I would travel to different places and start up a Walk for Mankind.
So were you kind of a trainer of people?
Yeah, I would go to the different Kiwanis clubs and tell them, do a program. Kiwanis clubs always have a program as part of each meeting each week. We usually have a meal. It's usually a luncheon meeting, and have a luncheon speaker, and I did that quite a number of times and started walks in different places. I remember particularly probably one of the most successful ones was a place where you lived in Valdosta, Georgia. And I remember that when after I had done that, they had given me a gift, and the gift was a pair of Florsheim shoes, which was top of the line shoes.
Wow.
I was so proud.
Yeah.
And pleased
Nice.
and appreciative of that. It was uncalled for. And I usually would tell clubs that they needed to devote their money to charity and not to me. And I did that with Kiwanis through the years when I would give programs or whatever. Well, let's see. I became Lieutenant Governor of Kiwanis after the Walk for Mankind's success, that they were in our area were looking for someone to be the administrator of the Kiwanis clubs. There would be something like 8 or 10 Kiwanis clubs in an area where they would have a local person that would be designated to oversee the clubs to a certain extent. So I did that. They had to check because I hadn't been president of our club, and they said that that hadn't been done before. But they looked at the rules and said, you don't have to be president to be lieutenant governor. So I got to be lieutenant governor, which had me to travel around to Kiwanis clubs during that time. Anyway, moving along, one of the things that we did in Kiwanis that I enjoyed was, and one of the things that made me interested in the first place was the Kiwanis Carnival at Halloween time. And when I went to my first one, when we came to Americus and was not a Kiwanian, I saw the camaraderie that the Kiwanians had in putting together that program. And I said, I want to be a part of that. And when the dean asked me to join Kiwanis, I was delighted to be able to participate and be part of a group that had similar ambitions for the community, and could work together in a team effort. And the esprit de corps has always been very appealing to me. And some of my best friends during the years in Americas have been Kiwanians. Most of those guys have passed away by this time, since I'm as old as I am. But I keep on plugging and look toward the future. Concentrate on that more than the past. So
what was the Kiwanis Carnival? What was that? Like a pit booth? Was that booths that kids walked around to?
Yeah, we would have booths, and we would have one year I got my friend Ralph Thomas to work with me with his lathe to create the wooden milk bottles that you would throw a ball at and knock over. something that we always had was a haunted house. And on occasion, I was the Dracula for the haunted house. Run for your lives. Oh, one year we scared a little boy so much that he got angry and he came back through and he tore up as much of our haunted house that he could. He was vindictive for us scaring him. So we got away from the haunted house. Another thing that we had was people would make cakes and have a cake walk. That was a highlight of the Kiwanis, to have the cake walk and to win cakes. And one year they had lots of cakes left over, so I played, and on one play I got 4 cakes.
Oh no.
So wow. Vance Mathis wanted one of my cakes. He was a good friend that was often we would do programs together, and he was a mighty keyboard specialist and played beautifully. And he would accompany my songs, and then he would play an instrumental number along with the programs that we would give. So Vance wanted one of my cakes, and I told him I'd have to ask June which one. So finally, he was sort of put off, but he got his cake eventually and wrote me a very nice note that was dripping with sarcasm about my generosity. Oh, man, I loved Vance. Vance became one of the higher-ranking Methodist ministers that oversaw a group of Methodist ministers in his ministry. He's long since retired. Anyway, later on, in about 1990, I became president of the America's Kiwanis Club, and one of my projects was to plant trees, and we had a project where we would sell trees, and then after we made money selling these bare root seedlings, which were very inexpensive, maybe $1 a piece, and we bought them for 50 cents, so we doubled our money. And then the next week we would use the Boy Scouts and Key Club to plant the trees, use our profits to plant trees around highway medians, around prisons and the courthouse and schools and things of that sort. And also Jay Clyde and I, Jay was a math teacher, a professor, and Jay was very much involved with the community as well. And we started a reading program where the Kiwanians would go into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and read to kids. And we felt like at that time, with Kiwanians doing that, we were primarily a men's club. Still are to this day. There are a few women in Kiwanis clubs, but primarily men. And we felt like many of the young kids had never seen a man read. So here we gave them that experience in the schools, and we always enjoyed doing that. And later on, in 95, I ran for governor of Georgia Kiwanis, and I was not successful. I came in second, and then 2 years later, I ran for governor, and the guy I ran against, his father and grandfather had been Georgia governor of Kiwanis and had been most of them had been president of Kiwanis International.
Wow.
So I ran against Mark Smith, and I won. Remarkably, I really had to work at it to do that. Mark and I had followed the governor around to all the 22 different district rallies division rallies throughout the state of Georgia. Both of us given presentations as we were running. The existing governor had allowed us to do that. And my emphasis was on community service. I was head of community service in Georgia at that time. And his thing was to get people to sign up to go to Kiwanis International Convention in Las Vegas. So I had a little bit of advantage on emphasizing community service. And at the end of the year, as we were running against each other, I wrote a booklet coordinating all the community service projects in Georgia and sent that to every club in the state. And my motto as we went to the convention was, he wrote the book on service. So anyway, I got to be governor that year, and Mark ran again the next year, and he got to be governor following me. And he sort of resented me and gave me a lot of negative input since he was right behind me and he was on the administrative staff. So anyway, we got along okay. And Mark's wife and my wife went to the Tennessee fitness spa for a week together. So they were good friends. Probably a little better friends with each other than Mark and I were with each other.
Yeah.
Anyway, my project was, two projects again, was to read to kids and to plant trees. And I had a goal of, we had about 10,000 Kiwanians throughout Georgia. And my goal was for them to read to kids on, 10,000 occasions, I believe it was. And also to plant, to get people to buy the bare root seedlings, which I said to plant, get the community to buy the trees and to do the planting, but the impetus was Kiwanis. So in short, to plant 30,000 trees. Well, we doubled both of those.
Wow.
So I chose goals that were challenging but very reachable. So we did manage to exceed both of our goals that we had at that time, which brought me a great deal of joy to be able to do that. While I was governor of Georgia Kiwanis, we had to visit the different divisions throughout the state, and there were about 22 of those. So we would go to banquets throughout the state, and I would give a presentation and emphasize my goals for the year, and I would include for the trees. I chose that because I've been very passionate about our environment and the viability of maintaining an environment that is suitable for human habitation down, since 1958, when I was in college. I read the works of Thomas Malthus, a summary of those, and he had predicted that population was going to exceed the carrying capacity of the planet if we were not careful, and that was written many years ago. But I read about that, and I got interested in our population. And when we were married, I said, we should not have more than 2 children. And well, that's what we did. But June said, don't tell our children that, which we didn't, and now we have 7 grandchildren. So I've always been way too obedient, I guess. But anyway, I love peace, and that's been an overriding concern. Anyway, in going around the state, I would talk about the goals and things that Kiwanis was doing, and talked about the environment and things that we should be aware of. And June, since she's such a effective and inspirational speaker, I had to have her speak as well. So her project was KISS, Kiwanians Involving Spouses in Service. So she would talk to them about that. And her project at the end of the year at the convention was to have people to bring items from their home area to have a silent auction and to raise money through the silent auction. And she also had the book, the children's book that was written by Jimmy Carter and his daughter Amy. Amy had done the illustrations, and it was a story that Jimmy Carter had made up and told to his children as they were growing up. So she had this signed by Jimmy Carter, and she sold those and made more money than's ever been made by anything that's been done for the use of the Kiwani, Georgia Kiwanis. And we used those funds that she raised. It was something between, it seemed like it was $20,000, but I may mix that up with the Walk for Mankind. But it was well over $10,000 that she had raised with that. And we used most of that money, we designated it for the project that was promoted by Kiwanis International. And that project was to do away with iodine deficiency anemia, which is lack of iodine in the diets of people that don't have iodine in their salt. And it's a nickel's worth of salt over a lifetime can prevent people from having this deficiency in iodine. And it was the world's leading cause in mental retardation of children, and also the leading cause in the remediation of goiter. Anyway, most of that money was spent in promoting the iodine deficiency disorder. So that was my wonderful wife's work in doing that.
So since being governor, you continued to be active in Kiwanis, and you have, I know you've done a lot of singing, and you've also continued to read to kids too, right?
Yes, I do. And whenever I was going around over the state, I'm not a good golfer anyway, but typically the governor of Kiwanis, as he would visit the different places, he would play golf with the presidents of the local clubs or the lieutenant governors in the area, particularly the lieutenant governors. Golf was the thing that they would typically do. And I said, David's not going to play golf this year. He's going to either plant a tree, which I did a lot of, or I'm going to read to kids, which I also did a lot of. And that was every division I went to, that was something that I asked them to let me do, and practically all of them did. Had me do that. Some of them both plant a tree and read to the kids. I remember I'd been up late one night, and I had barely gotten ready to go read to kids at 8 o'clock in the morning. And when I got there, I read to the kids, and it was first grade, and there were two little boys sitting right at my feet as I was reading to them. And June, as a reading specialist, she had these huge picture books that I used in my reading to kids. Well, when I got through, one of the two little boys looked up at me and said, Mr. David, we tied your shoes, because I had forgotten to tie my shoes.
Cute.
Oh, me.
Fun memory.
Another cute thing that June and I did is lots of times we would have prime rib of beef the night before at the banquet. And usually one of them was enough for both of us. So we put probably hers in a plastic bag surreptitiously. And the next day, baked potato and prime rib of beef unwrapped away from the plastic was placed on the motor of our car as we made our trip to our next I hate to tell this, but it sure did make a good lunch the next day.
Sounds good.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
It was very good. Okay. One thing that you alluded to is in our mentioning Lillian Carter. She was a dear friend of mine, and when Jimmy Carter was running for president, Cheryl helped out with. I had developed a tour of Plains, Georgia, and I had Miss Lillian Carter to go with me around Plains and to explain various features as I was putting together the script for my tour. So during that tour, I had many memorable experiences. Let's see. One of them was I had the moderator for the Today Show. Jane Pauley was one, but it was the male. I forget his name, but he went on the tour with me, and I had a speaker, a microphone that would play through the speaker in my radio, and my battery had gone dead. So I had this moderator of the Today Show sitting in the co-pilot seat, and I handed the microphone to him and the battery, and I said, how about putting that in for me? So I was able to get good assistance there in getting my microphone ready.
Sure.
Another time, I had two ladies to come on my tour, and they said, we were roommates at Juilliard. And I said, wow. And one of them said, yeah, I've written a book on singing. And her name was Diane Del Monte, as I recall. So when we got to the edge of town, there was a field of corn out there. And I go into that field of corn would never see a plow. That field of corn would be deserted now. And anyway.
So this is, you were singing that?
Yes.
Can you sing it?
Probably not, but that field of corn would never see a plow. And then going down to that field of corn would be deserted now. A man is born, but he's no good no how without a song. Anyway, off key. But anyway, at the end of the tour, they wanted to get with me and have me to sing some more and give me some pointers, which I'm sure I needed. And so anyway, I called June and I said, I'm bringing these two Juilliard roommates home with me for supper. And we did some more singing and playing. And Diane said, now, if you'll come down to Florida from time to time, I'll have you on the concert stage. I didn't want to be on the concert stage, and probably she was way too optimistic about my abilities, because Grandma would tell you, I have a lousy ability to keep tempo. So it's always been a hold up in singing. But very enjoyable to have that as a hobby.
Yeah.
And that's where it should be, and that's where it
Wow.
remained.
I love your voice.
Thank you, darling.
What about your partner, Billy Carter? You have any memories of? I remember you telling me something about a trip you made with him.
Oh
Share
yeah,
that.
we had to go we had to go to Atlanta to get my tour approved by the Public Service Commission, and Billy went with me to do that. And when I picked Billy Carter, Jimmy Carter's brother up, younger brother up, he had his breakfast with him, and his breakfast was I think it was an 8-pack of the little small half beers. What is it, 7 or 8 ounce beers? And he didn't consume the total 8-pack, and left me with what was left, which I still have somewhere. We need to.
Oh, really?
We need to take pictures of Billy Carter's 8-pack.
Yeah.
Billy Carter did put his name on a beer that a beer company had, and people say it's the worst beer they ever tasted, but Billy Carter approved it when Billy Carter had probably had too many beers. So that's how that one hit the market. Okay, another thing that happened was I was at a reception. Brown and Jenny, Jim Brown and Jenny Hodges were good friends of ours, and when their daughter married Jimmy's son, Chip Carter, we were at a reception at the home of the Hodges, and I was spending time with Leon Carter and talking over old times and having a good time, and she asked June if she could adopt David, which I would have been I would have been a brother to Jimmy Carter if that
There you go.
had happened. But that I did when we had the tour in Plains. Before she had a bodyguard, a state patrol bodyguard, I would go to a car and get her and bring her to the station, and sort of took an interest in taking good care of Lee and Carter. And as she would give out brochures about the Carter campaign, she needed a table. So I brought a little side table that she could keep her tour things in. And after everything was said and done, I took my table home with me. So I have the Lee and Carter table somewhere in this house. So I've got a few artifacts of different things that were meaningful, and that was one of them. Hello, Cheryl. I hate for you to go to all this trouble, but I think it's going to be worth it. God's trombones. And God stepped out on space, and he looked around and he said, I'm lonely. And as far as the eye of God could see, it was darker than the midnight down in a cypress swamp. And God said, really stop for a while to hear me smile.